So this is my fantasy still life model based on this image which I've chosen. For the books I used cubes and I adjusted the subdivision levels. For the hardcover faces I selected them on face mode and extruded them. I adjusted the edges of one of the books so it had this different effect, and I extruded the pages so that it looked a bit more like paper. For the bottle, I went into the side view and imported the image plane. I used the CV curve tool to draw around the shape and control the vertices. I then used the revolve tool to reverse the direction so that it was inverted. And then I modified it and converted the NURBS to polygons. Also for the bottle, I cloned it and reduced its size so that there was a smaller version inside, and then I cut off the top of the bottle so it looked like the liquid inside. I used different textures and reduced the transparency of the outer polygon so that it looked like a glass bottle. I did the same thing with the plant pot. I also raised the lid so that I could put the leaves inside. For the leaves I used a sphere polygon and I flattened it, and then I adjusted the vertices to make them pointed, and I changed the size and the width of some of them just to give them some individuality. For the soil in the pot I just used lots of spheres for that as well, making different shapes, and again I just multiplied them and changed them so that they looked more individual. I also used the blend texture on the plant pot just so that it looked a bit more realistic. For the rock window I used the bevel tool and I adjusted the fractions. I also added small leaves to the rock window. For the chest I used two separate polygons. I used a rectangular polygon and I used the multi-cut tool to cut the edges where the metal pieces are, and I extruded them. And for the top piece I used a cylinder polygon and I sliced it in half so that it was this half cylinder shape. And then I adjusted the vertices and the edges to give it this unique shape. I used the multi-cut tool to get all these details and then extruded them just like the other parts of the metal. For the wood I just adjusted the edges and I used the bevel tool to make it have a bit of an edge to it. I cut pieces out and tried to make it look quite jagged. For some of the leaves I used the smooth selection tool where I pressed B and I was able to adjust how soft I wanted it to be. So this is the final model. I'm happy with it. If there was anything I could change for next time, I would probably try to add some UV textures and use the UV unwrapping rather than just sticking to Lambert's. However, I'm pretty happy with it. This is my 3D model for the robot. For the head I used a cylinder polygon and I adjusted the edges to make it look more rounded. I was able to use the multi-cut tool to carve its eyes and then I extruded them so that they were indented into his head. I then added a Lambert which I assigned black so that it looked like they were deeper. For the arms I used cylinder polygons and circle polygons. I adjusted the width and size of them. For some of them I used the bevel tool to make them look more robotic. For the feet I used polygon cubes and I adjusted the subdivision levels. I then used the soft selection tool to carve the shape of his feet. For this heart-shaped metal headpiece I used the CV curve tool. I drew around the shape and controlled the vertices and I revolved it. And lastly, I converted the NURBS to polygons and I used the smoothing tool just to give it a softer edge. For this section on the stomach, I used the multi-cut tool to carve the shape I wanted and then I extruded it. I then added in some triangles and rectangles just to add some of the details. Lastly, I used Lamberts to create the textures for the robot. For the grey sections of the robot, I used the Blinn Lambert and made them look metallic. I increased the glow intensity and the specular colour I increased to a lighter grey. For the blue section of the robot, I used the anisotropic texture. I increased the roughness and the specular colour. I made sure these were different textures, as I could see in the photo that some were shinier than the others. All in all, I'm happy with my robot. If there's anything I was going to improve on for next time, I would probably try and pose it like the reference photo. However, I'm happy with it in the T-pose.